Hail and well-met adventurers, and welcome to the first official episode of Fable Fire. I'm Cameron Holt, and today we're going to be building an epic wizard laboratory scene for my D&D Twitch stream, Arcanorama. If you want to see the build in action and have a little more context, there's a link in the description below to the episode in which we used this battle map. While you're there, subscribe to Arcanorama's YouTube channel, and you can watch our entire campaign from the beginning, after you've watched this video and subscribed to Fable Fire, that is. Without further ado, let's make an epic build to impress our players. As usual, I start by planning things out a bit in my head. I know that this scene takes place in a large underground marble room at the roots of a giant ancient tree, where a magical ritual is taking place. The player's goal is to stop that ritual. I decide that a 2 foot by 2 foot square playable area would be a decent size, so I go ahead and cut that out of XPS foam. I recently got a huge panel of 2-inch thick foam that will serve as a nice stable base without needing any reinforcement. After I tap on it for no reason, I begin lightly sketching out my plans for the layout of the map. I do this lightly with a Sharpie so that I don't leave too many indentations on the foam itself. I know there will be a magic ritual circle in the center of the room, so I start there and build outward. At the back of the chamber will be a large wall of wood that's the root of the tree. There will be a balcony supported by pillars, so I loosely mark where the support pillars will be. Finally, I mark the placement of the 3 gateways through which the ritual, if completed, will summon even more baddies for the players to contend with. Next, I make a grid of 1-inch squares to easily measure the distance characters can travel on their turns. First with a hobby blade, and then running over the grooves again with a dull pencil to thicken the lines. The grid also helps to measure out exact distances for pillars and gateways to make the board nice and symmetrical. With the base mostly ready, I move over to the circle cutting jig on my Proxxon hot wire cutter to cut out the stone circle where the ritual is taking place. If you don't have a Proxxon or a circle cutter jig, you can still achieve a decent effect by marking your foam with a Sharpie, then cutting it carefully with a hobby blade or a handheld hot wire cutter. With a roughly 8-inch circle cut out, I trace it onto the base to solidify its final placement. We'll come back to the ritual circle, but first I hop over to the root of the tree that will be the back wall of the diorama. I measure out what I hope is a good height, about 5 or 6 inches above the ground level of the base, then cut a 6-inch by 2 foot wall of foam to use as the root. Once I get the foam board cut to a more manageable size with my hobby blade, I move over to the Proxxon for an even cut. Once I know that everything lines up properly, I start hacking away at the foam wall to give it a bark-like texture. I started doing this with my hobby blade, but it wasn't quite long enough and was very inefficient. Instead, I opted for this beautiful Fable Fire branded kitchen knife to move the process along. Shiny. This was a very satisfying process. I try to keep all the cuts in the same direction like wood grain would be, then go back in and add some angular cuts to make some imperfections and break up the monotony. For an added last bit of wood detail, I take a wire brush and rough up the surface even more. Definitely wear a respirator or a dust mask for this process, as you really don't want to breathe in the tiny foam particles. And there will be particles. Ooh, wood-like. Things are starting to come together now, so it's time to finish off the ritual circle. Instead of designing a magic circle from scratch, I used the AI image generator Dall-E Mini, link in the description, to create a Transmutation Circle. I looked over the different options and chose the one that appealed to me the most. Obviously the designs aren't perfect, so I load them up in Photoshop and clarify the design myself, being sure to add in a few infernal runes to symbolize Alpha and Omega, just for fun. Print the circle out on a standard US letter size paper and cut it to fit on the foam circle. Once it's centered and securely taped down, I take an X-Acto knife and begin the tedious process of carefully carving the symbol into the foam. This was the most tedious part of the entire process, but it was well worth it for the final results. When the X-Acto carving is done, I once again go in with a dull pencil to bold in the lines of the design. This is meant to be rough-hewn stone, so when it's finished, I once again grab the beautiful Fable Fire kitchen knife and hack away at the edges of the circle. Always cut with the blade away from your body and hands so you don't end up texturing a finger. With the main texture cut in, I press a foil ball against the entire circle to really accentuate the imperfect stone texture. Give it a few spins to make sure it's good. And then it's time to build the gates. Ignore the sad columns in the background, we'll get to those later. I start the gates by cutting out a rectangle in the size that I want the gate to be. Then I mark the center of the rectangle with a line for reference, and mark the width of the outer layer an equal distance on either side, about 1/4 inch. I keep the sides straight up to a certain point, and then carefully draw the curve of the archway on either side to the center line at the top. There's probably a better way to do this, but this is how it worked for me. With that marked, I take the 1-inch foam and slice it on the Proxxon into 4 sheets. Cut out the first archway, then trace it onto the next sheet, and measure another 1/4 inch inside of that one. The outer section stays the same so that the sheets can be laminated or glued back together in the next step. I finish and cut out the archway, and repeat, creating 4 layers of overlapping arches. Done, you've got this nice layered archway that's ready to be glued together, carved, and textured. I also cut a long thin strip to act as sheet metal around the outside of this main gateway so that it stands out a little more from the others. Glue it over the curve in sections to make my life a little easier. Then cut off the excess. Next I go in with an X-Acto and a dull pencil to cut individual stones that make up the archway. When that's done, I use the wire brush in all different directions to give a brushed metal texture to the outside of the gateway. Then add another small strip of foam to the pinnacle of the archway for added decoration. A neat trick for metalwork is to take a clickable pen with the pen part clicked in and press the round tip into the foam. This creates little rivets in the metal and adds a nice bit of detail. I also hold on to the inner cutouts from the archway, gluing them together for an idea I have elsewhere on the map. With that, I texture the stone with a ball of foil, and this archway is just about done. I take the inner cuts from the archway and measure them against the ritual circle, then cut them to fit against it. This will serve as a nice platform on which the casters carrying out the ritual can stand. texture that with some foil, then carve in my infernal runes. And glue the platform to the circle. Now it's time for the columns. I want these to fit within a 1-inch square on the board, so I cut them into 1-inch by 1-inch strips that are about 3 inches tall. I only need 4 of these, but it's always good to have extras if you can, in case something breaks down the line. Next, I measure out the columns against some chipboard from a cracker box. Cutting this into strips will allow us to make a guide in which we can cut out our fancy columns on the Proxon. I cut a simple design, being sure not to cut in further than 1/4 of the length of the pillar. Since we'll be turning the pillars for each cut, doing so would cut the foam into unusable pieces. I use T-pins to secure the chipboard to the foam to be sure that it fits properly before gluing the guide together, like a small box missing one side. When everything is glued into place, we can remove the T-pins and make sure that the foam didn't also get glued in the process. Then it's over to the Proxon again to cut along our guide. After each cut, remove the foam, give it a 1/4 turn, then place it back in the guide and cut again, cutting each of the 4 sides of the pillars. In the end, you're left with this beautiful column that's almost ready. Drum on your table, then texture the marble pillars with some aluminum foil. Be careful to support the opposite side of the pillar as you press the foil in so you don't snap your hard work into pieces. With the pillars textured and sufficiently tapped on, we'll create the 2 smaller gateways. For these, I'm using an archway template to make my life a little easier. I trace the 2 arches, cut them out, and then once again slice each archway into 4 or 5 sheets of foam. With the sheets numbered, I trace consecutively smaller openings onto each, then cut them out, once again saving the cut interiors to make 2 more platforms for the ritual circle. I use the same techniques from the larger archway on the 2 smaller ones, foregoing the sheet metal look, and we're left with these beauties. I try out several orientations for the platforms, symmetrical at the front, symmetrical at the sides, but ultimately I like this asymmetrical look, to add some more visual interest since the room is already very mirrored. I like to look at everything assembled frequently to make sure that I like the direction things are going, and also to make sure they fit together. With everything placed around the map, I am very pleased with how it's coming along. All that's left to be constructed is the balcony, so I count my measurements. And then cut a thinned out strip of foam to act as the second floor. When I'm sure that it's a good size, I create the playable grid with an X-Acto and a pencil on both sides. This is so that I can use the grid to mark exactly where the pillars will meet the bottom of the platform. Then, as accurately as possible using the grid, I freehand an arc so that there is room for the main gateway in front of the balcony and cut out the curve. Off camera, I texture the balcony with a foil ball. With that, this ritual room is looking good, and now it just needs to be sealed, painted, and assembled. Since the stone circle and the marble floor will be the same color and texture, I go ahead and glue it down. Then, I use the black magic base coat, a mixture of matte, Mod Podge, and black paint, to seal the foam, while also getting a black base coat. I use the same base coat mixture for all of the pieces, opting to skip it on the surfaces that will be glued together, like the tops and the bottoms of the pillars. I was a fool and described this scene to my players as being made of marble, which means now I have to paint a marble texture. But there's a pretty cool trick for this, and it was an excuse to finally get an airbrush and learn how to use it. Always be sure to wear a respirator and work in a well-ventilated area with an airbrush. There's no need to poison yourself for your hobby. I start by adding to the black base coat, filling in the cracks that the paintbrush has missed. And then I add a hint of purple for some color variety. Finally, to get the marble texture, I take some used dryer sheets and gently stretch them out, creating all kinds of holes and openings. Then, tightly wrap the sheet around the pillars. And come back with a near white in the airbrush. You want the dryer sheet to be as tight as possible so that it doesn't move at all during this process. Once the paint has fully dried, remove the dryer sheet and be amazed by the gorgeous marble texture. I will say, this works much better on smaller pieces and would be best on bases for minis, as it is very tough to get the sheets tight enough on larger surfaces like the battle map. With all of the marble painted, I move on to the tree root. I mix a bit of yellow with the brown so it's not as flat, and apply a mixture of wet and dry brushing to the root. And because this is a magical tree that I've described as giving off silver light, once the brown paint dries, I dry brush some silver metallic paint to accentuate all of the detail work that I did. I was very pleased with this texture and paint job. Finally, with everything painted, it's time to glue the pieces together. I glue the tops of the pillars to the bottom of the balcony first, and then move on to the assembly of the rest of the map. Then it's time to fade to black for another epic reveal. Thank you so much for watching. That was a long one, so thank you for sticking it out. And if you're still here and you like the video, subscribe if you haven't already to be sure to catch the next epic build, in addition to D&D Pokemon fusions, mini painting, art challenges, and all things D&D. I'll see all of you in the next video. But until then, stay safe out there, adventurers.